In this portion of the lecture, we're ready to concentrate on Poem 9 relative to progression of thought across the chapters beginning with Proverbs 4 and extending through Proverbs 9. Poem 9 concentrates on theme C, that is, influential women. It's titled, Beware the Lethal Seductress. It encompasses all of Proverbs chapter 7. While it's true that poem number 9 issues caution repeatedly, it contains no actual reprimand, no specification of a prior misdeed followed by corrective action. A single term belongs to the vocabulary of reprimand, appearing with uncommon poignancy toward the close. Impervious to prior warnings, the beguiled youth will blunder into what's called a fool's discipline, 722. Like a feathered shaft, this painful discipline will strike home, futile as regards reform, but fatal, verse 23. In poem number 9, references to body behavior are metaphoric, dealing with either espousing wisdom or resisting seduction. And here we contrast poem 3 with its more literal moral conduct corresponding to specific body parts. Within the summons, the sage urges his son symbolically to guard wisdom as the pupil of his eye, to bind it on his fingers, to write it on his mind. Chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. In a closing challenge, he instructs how to resist the earliest overtures of seduction. Verse 25 reads, Don't let your mind deviate toward her ways. The mind thus marks the premier battlefield, since in both this poem and in poem number 8, lacking mind, that is, senseless, describes one who crosses into adultery. We see this in 632 and 725. It is the theme of influential women that rises to a new level here in poem number 9. Although it concentrates on the antagonist, there are 2 verses within section 1 that shed new information on the protagonist woman as well. Whereas previously she was known only by actions and not by name, now her name Chokhmah, or woman wisdom, is disclosed, and she is further personified as sister in verse 4. Even her companion, named Insight, earns a kinship designation. Since woman wisdom provides protective service equivalent to the anonymous beneficial woman back in poem 8, any doubt concerning that earlier woman's identity now disappears. The development accorded the antagonist woman in poem 9 exceeds that of earlier poems. The sage now moves beyond reports of honey turned bitter, of smooth turned to slicing, of scintillation turned to slavery, as was found back in poem 4. And by way of reminder, that was the lone woman-themed poem within cycle 1. And while the portrayal of hazard surely escalated in poem 8, which was the first woman-themed poem of cycle 2, through the description of the huntress' captivating eyelashes and vengeful husband, when we reach poem 9, the poet brings the antagonist woman to life through eyewitness reporting of suspense and catastrophe. The reader enjoys a front row seat watching as the youth makes his fatal mistakes. The hearer is riveted as imagination conjures a city street at twilight, an ambling youth, a woman dressed to snare a second look, now reaching out to capture him, to kiss him, to kill him. For the first time, we actually overhear the seductress honeyed words, a rhetoric of impunity laced with piety. We smell sweet spices' aroma, and we hear the arrow leave its bowstring, first piercing air, then piercing soft tissue. Now at last, discipline penetrates the resistant fool. Chapter 7, verse 22. Too late he has received this rebuke, deadly deep within. Regarding the theme of life, In poem 9, the poet not only names this supremely valuable commodity, but heightens the associated urgency by forging it into a command. Live, we find in 7, verse 2. Within Proverbs 4 through 9, this imperative occurs only 3 times, 4:4 and also 9:6. Let's wrap up what we've observed concerning poem number 9. Poem 9 comprises the middle of 3 influential women poems that together complete cycle 2. It is here in poem 9 that the feminine antagonist unveils her supreme seductive performance. Since the next poem will present woman wisdom in equally superlative terms, poem 10 there will join with this poem 9 to form a complementary pair. Poem 9 escalates the warning of poem 8, for there in poem 8, the youth discovered that entanglement with a foreign married woman is senseless, 6:32. Then in poem 9, he discovers that this path is even worse. It is suicidal, 7:23. Just as penalties for succumbing to the antagonist women back in poems 8 and 9 steadily worsen, the benefits extended by protagonist women, although concise, grow correspondingly more luminous. In poem 8, she is anonymous. Now in poem 9, she gains a name, woman wisdom, and a relationship, she is sister. These pave the way for her grand parade of accomplishments that will get underway in poem 10. That is all of Proverbs 8. Expressions that urge the youth to welcome wisdom similarly have been growing more intense, shifting from pay attention, 4:20, now urging him to guard her like the pupil of your eye, write her on your mind, in 7:2 and 3. The rhetorical factor most responsible for propelling poem 9 beyond the persuasive impact of poem 8 is the shift from an inventory of penalties that we see in poem 8, an inventory consisting of things like blows, ignominy, indelible shame, in chapter 6:33, now escalating to a virtual novella that discloses the successive steps of one individual's death by seduction. The poem's conclusion dispels any uncertainty concerning the earlier thread of poem 4, which claimed, in 5:23, he will die for lack of discipline. Now, the grandfather states unequivocally, indeed, many are the pierced whom she has felled, and countless are all her slain. Chapter 7, verse 26. No wonder the grandfather once again urges the son to grasp tightly the reins of his mind. In 7:25 we read, don't let your mind deviate toward her ways. It's a conscious reinforcement of his bedrock exhortation for body behavior found all the way back in poem 3. So in chapter 4, verse 23, we read, against every imprisonment protect your mind. Now let's proceed to poem 10. Poem 10 concentrates on theme C, again, that is influential women. It's titled, Have You Considered Woman Wisdom's Offer? It spans all of Proverbs 8. Although poem 10 does not present any actual indictment, the theme of reprimand surfaces twice in the term discipline. Youths are urged, get my discipline, not silver, and knowledge rather than high-grade gold. That's chapter 8, verse 10. As if to reinforce the priority of discipline, the term reappears in Woman Wisdom's closing challenge. In her double command to listen, notice what it is the youths must listen for. From chapter 8, 32 and 33, we read, so now, my sons, listen to me, listen to discipline, and so become wise. Above all other facets of wisdom, youths must pursue discipline. Consider next the theme of body behavior within poem 10. The rectitude surrounding the behavior of body parts here in poem 10 forms a striking contrast to the adulterous account, one poem earlier, in poem 9. This is true since woman wisdom operates with high integrity. Her mouth issues honesty, truth, and fairness instead of twisted talk. That shows up in chapter 8, 6 through 8. Aside from these expressions, body behavior does not surface here in poem 10. The theme of influential women overshadows this poem with its majestic parade of woman wisdom's credentials. She opens with an introduction clearly reminiscent of Lady Wisdom's circuit back in chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. Or, more likely, instead of saying that this is reminiscent of chapter 1, we should say Proverbs 1 is reminiscent of chapter 8, for likely chapters 1 through 3 were written after this material. After anchoring her credentials in moral leadership and wealth, that's chapter 8, 5 through 21, woman wisdom recounts her accomplishments with a story dating all the way back to the dawn of creation, chapter 8, 22 to 31, which is proof of divine favor that she enjoys right up to this present day, chapter 8, verse 35. In contrast, the antagonist woman makes no appearance whatsoever here in poem 10. Woman wisdom waits until the last two lines before bringing up the theme of life. She outlines two groups, implying through the device of character summary that all persons belong to either one group or to the other. On the one hand are people who discover woman wisdom and so discover life and divine favor. That's 835. The remainder, they hate woman wisdom, thus confirming their love of death. Verse 36. How shall we summarize our observation of progression of thought in poem 10? Poem 10 concludes cycle 2 with the last of 3 influential woman poems. The preceding poem, that is poem 9, the pupil has just finished watching as an undisciplined youth allowed the seductress to lead him blindly to his death. From this grisly scene, the son predictably would recoil and now must be wondering, where can he turn for reliable guidance? To which the grandfather responds, "What's wrong? Can't you hear your solution? Woman wisdom still calling out to you?" That's chapter 8, verse 1. She makes herself available, verses 2 to 4, specifically inviting those who need her, verses 5 and 6. She is ethical, verses 7 and 8, and eminently valuable, 10 and 11. Individuals of high rank have employed her to provide moral rule, 15 and 16. She is reverent, verse 13, generous, verse 17, bringing revenue of genuine wealth as a byproduct of her ethical conduct, 20 and 21. There is, frankly, no reason remaining for the youth to delay enrolling as a client, as a disciple of woman wisdom, unless, of course, he entertains a death wish, verse 36. And now we come to the last poem of Proverbs 4 through 9, poem 11. This operates as a conclusion. It's entitled, "Whose invitation will you accept? Lady Wisdom's or Dame Folly's?" It spans all of Proverbs 9. The theme of reprimand appears in poem 11 through vocabulary, not by actual indictment. Here, Lady Wisdom trains those who, like herself, would issue a reprimand, training them so they may do so effectively. Chapter 9, 7 through 9. As far as the theme of body behavior is concerned, the body part mind appears twice in this poem. Both times it occurs within the expression lacking sense. Here, mind is translated sense. Lady Wisdom and Dame Folly alike appeal to passers-by who display this wisdom deficit, hoping to enlist them as so-called guests of their respective hospitalities. That appears in 9:4 and 16. The theme of influential women preoccupies poem 11. Protagonist and antagonist alike compete with each other to enroll potential guests. Both figures operate here as personifications. The theme of life and death, operates with uncommon impact in this closing poem of the grandfather's teaching. Twice, Lady Wisdom promises life. In the first, life can begin for the naive and senseless once they abandon naivety. 9:6. The second extends this benefit even further, promising not simply a beginning of life, but years of life for those who build on past practices of wisdom. Verse 11. Two expressions likewise refer to death. Both are associated with Dame Folly, and both are climactically reserved for the final verse of poem 11. In her final act of subterfuge, Dame Folly fails to disclose to her invitee that once he is there in her house, he will discover himself among the shades, those shadowy netherworld dwellers. The last hemistich makes this fact crystal clear. Her guests do not merely head toward Sheol, as was the case in 727. In a horrific culmination, they have arrived at their destination in Sheol's very depths. 9:18. Let's summarize what we can extract from poem 11 as regards progression of thought across Proverbs 4 through 9. With consummate skill, the grandfather's final poem depicts plainly the high-stakes contest raging over the youth. Whose invitation will he accept? At whose table will he recline? Have previous credentials portraying woman wisdom's integrity and generosity persuaded the youth to choose her? Has the expose of Dame Folly and her accomplices sufficiently revealed her tricks and so inoculated the youth against her schemes? Although poem 11 poses no explicit question, it powerfully presents the alternatives between which the youth must choose, and must choose now. There is one more layer subtly added through the teaching of this poem, number 11. Notice the three verses which begin, and we're starting at 9:7, whoever invests instruction in a scoffer grabs for himself disgrace. This segment of teaching presumes an audience of persons who, like Lady Wisdom, have advanced to the level of mentoring other disciples. As mentors in search of pupils, they need the ability to distinguish applicants having genuine potential, in contrast to those with whom, frankly, they should not waste their time. By including this mentor training instruction here in the final poem, the grandfather, speaking through the voice of Lady Wisdom, displays his own foresight. He stands ready to franchise the sapiential enterprise, helping thereby to ensure that it will continue long after he is gone. From this exploration of the progression of thought across Proverbs 4 through 9, it becomes evident that the sage has employed a recurring cycle of topics with increasing specificity, length, and intensity. General principles gave way to concrete visualization in the contest for the youth's allegiance. The crescendo steadily builds until the youth in the final poem must choose, and choose wisely he must, for the hazard of choosing folly will cost his life. In the next lecture, we'll explore the influential women in Proverbs, particularly which characters are figurative, which are literal, and how did the sage use figurative female characters to serve his greater purposes.